I watched my wife saying I don't need you and ended our marriage for freedom. I took pain, focused on work, refused her return, and built a life. We were sitting in the living room, a room that had once felt warm and full of life but now felt cold and distant. She looked at me, not with anger or sadness, but with a detached indifference that caught me completely off guard. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as she said, "I don't need you anymore. I'm better off alone." At first, I didn't process her words. It was like my brain was refusing to connect the dots. "What are you saying?" I asked, hoping I'd misunderstood. But her response left no room for doubt. "I want out. This marriage isn't working for me, and honestly, I've been thinking about this for a while." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I tried to find some sign of hesitation or regret in her expression, but there was none. She didn't look angry or even particularly upset, just done. I couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been harboring this decision while I was completely oblivious. I tried to reason with her. We've been together for years. We've built a life together. If something's wrong, we can work on it. You can't just throw it all away. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I wasn't ready to lose everything we had. Her response was as icy as her demeanor. "That's just it. I don't want to work on it. I've already made up my mind. I need to focus on myself now." She stood up and started walking toward the bedroom, leaving me sitting there stunned. It was the most surreal moment of my life. This was the woman I'd loved, trusted, and shared everything with, and now she was telling me that I was no longer part of her plan. The days that followed were a blur. She was methodical about everything, packing her things, dividing up belongings, and even drafting an email to confirm the split like it was a business transaction. There wasn't a single ounce of emotion from her side. It felt like I was grieving the loss of someone who was still alive, and worse, she didn't seem to care. The night she left for good was eerily quiet. She didn't even say goodbye, just a simple take care as she walked out the door with her bags. I sat there in the silence of our now empty apartment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I replayed every moment, every conversation, wondering what I'd missed. How had I not seen this coming? Was it something I'd done or not done? That first night alone was brutal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could do was sit there, consumed by a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. It felt like my entire world had collapsed in an instant. But in hindsight, that night was the beginning of something much bigger, something I couldn't have predicted at the time. The days after she left were unbearable at first. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, the kind that made every little sound like the creak of a floorboard or the hum of the refrigerator feel deafening. But as much as I was drowning in my own grief, something in me told me to stay curious, to figure out how she was adjusting to this better-off alone life she had been so adamant about. That curiosity, though, turned into something else entirely. It started with a notification on my phone. I hadn't unfollowed her on social media, yet I wasn't ready for that step. She had posted a picture, a wide smile, a glass of wine in her hand, surrounded by friends at what looked like a rooftop bar. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." People were quick to comment, showering her with supporting compliments about her newfound freedom. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Over the next few days, more posts followed. She was out and about, living a life that seemed tailor-made to scream, "Look how amazing I'm doing without you." Fancy brunches, weekend getaways, yoga sessions, and even a picture of her with a group of people I'd never seen before, laughing and carefree. If her goal was to paint a picture of a flawless new chapter, she was succeeding. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. While she was flaunting her freedom, I was left trying to piece my life back together, haunted by the what-ifs and whys. But something about the sheer perfection of her posts didn't sit right with me. It was too polished, too calculated. This wasn't the woman I had been married to for years. She hated yoga, and the rooftop bars she was frequenting were the same ones she used to call pretentious. None of it felt real. Then I started hearing things. A mutual friend reached out, hesitant but concerned. "Hey, I don't mean to pry," they began, "but is she okay? She's been going out a lot, like every night. It just seems off." That was the first crack in the image she'd been projecting. It wasn't just me who noticed something wasn't adding up. And then there were the stories about the new crowd she was hanging out with. From what I could gather, they weren't exactly supportive influences, parties that lasted until the early hours of the morning, questionable relationships. In a sense, she was trying too hard to prove something to herself, or maybe to me. What struck me most, though, wasn't just her newfound social butterfly persona. It was the contrast between us. While she was out trying to plaster over whatever void she was feeling, I was here, slowly finding clarity in the quiet. Sure, I wasn't living some Instagram-worthy life, but there was something honest about my pain. It was raw, but it was real. The turning point came when someone sent me a photo from one of her nights out. She wasn't posing or smiling for the camera this time. Instead, she looked lost, staring off into the distance, her drink untouched. For a moment I felt pity, but that pity quickly gave way to a realization. Her new life wasn't about thriving. It was about running from what I didn't know yet, but it wasn't freedom she had found. It was avoidance. The irony was hard to miss. She had left claiming she was better off without me, but everything about her actions screamed the opposite. While she was spiraling into a whirlwind of distractions, I found myself taking the first tentative steps toward rebuilding my life quietly, but steadily. For the first time, I began to see the cracks in her facade and maybe, just maybe, the strength in my own. The picture of her staring into the distance at that party stuck with me. It wasn't just the image itself, it was what it represented. The carefully curated life she had been showcasing was starting to unravel, even if only in small, fleeting moments. And while I wasn't actively trying to investigate her life, pieces of the puzzle began falling into my lap, painting a very different picture than the one she'd been posting online. It started innocently enough. A CO worker, who had seen us together countless times at company events, casually asked about her during a coffee break. "How's she doing? I saw her the other night at that new place downtown. She didn't look too great." I tried to keep my response neutral, something vague about how we were no longer together. Still, the CO worker's words lingered. This wasn't the first time someone had mentioned seeing her out, and the stories all seemed to follow a pattern: late nights, excessive drinking, and a visible exhaustion that no filter could hide. Then came the message. It was from one of her old friends, someone she had been close with for years but had seemingly distanced herself from recently. "Hey, I don't mean to overstep," it began, "but I'm worried about her. She's been acting strange, and I thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of a text exchange they'd had. In it, my ex-wife admitted that she was struggling more than she let on. She talked about feeling isolated and unsure if she had made the right decisions. Reading those words brought a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, proof that her freedom wasn't the triumph she wanted everyone to believe. But another part of me felt an unexpected sadness. Despite everything, I didn't want her to be unhappy. I just wished she'd been honest about it instead of pretending to be untouchable. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just about her newfound social life. Financially, she was struggling. She had underestimated how expensive it would be to maintain the lifestyle she was portraying. Nights out, designer clothes, and trips weren't cheap, especially when she no longer had the financial stability we'd built together. And then there was the matter of her new crowd. Mutual friends who had stayed in touch with her mentioned the growing tension within her circle. These weren't lifelong friends or people who truly cared about her. They were acquaintances, fickle and opportunistic. One friend even told me about a night where she was left stranded after a petty argument, forced to call an Uber at 2 a.m. That wasn't the kind of independence she'd claimed to want. What really hit home, though, was a conversation I had with a mutual friend over coffee. "I don't think she knows who she is right now," they said. "She's trying so hard to be someone else, someone she thinks she should be, and it's not working." That comment struck a nerve. It explained so much of what I'd been observing. She wasn't just trying to prove something to the world, she was trying to prove something to herself. But while her life seemed to spiral, mine had started to shift in the opposite direction. I wasn't chasing distractions or trying to mask my pain. I was facing it, and in doing so, I was beginning to rebuild. Little by little, I started reclaiming my confidence. I went back to the gym, focused on work, and even started reconnecting with old friends, people who genuinely cared about me. I wasn't plastering my progress all over social media, but I was making it, and that was enough. As more truth about her situation emerged, I began to feel something unexpected: clarity. The life she left behind wasn't the problem. It was her inability to confront her own unhappiness. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't the one who needed to change. It didn't take long before the cracks in her carefully crafted life widened into full-blown fractures. The stories I'd been hearing, the late nights, the financial strain, the shallow friendships were only the tip of the iceberg. Her attempt to build a new, better version of herself had been crumbling for weeks, but now it was impossible to ignore. One day, a message from a mutual friend landed in my inbox. It was blunt. "You're not going to believe what just happened." According to them, she'd shown up at a party dressed to the nines, of course as if clinging to the facade, but things had gone south fast. She got into an argument with someone in her new social circle, a guy she had been seeing casually. The details were hazy, but apparently he had made some unkind remark about her behavior, calling her out in front of everyone. Instead of fighting back, she broke down in tears and left the party humiliated. That was the moment when people around her started to see what I'd been seeing all along. The confidence she exuded was paper thin. It was all performance, and now the performance was falling apart in public. I'd like to say that hearing this brought me satisfaction, but it didn't. If anything, I felt a strange mix of pity and relief. Pity because no one deserves to hit rock bottom that way, and relief because it reinforced a truth I'd been slowly coming to terms with. I couldn't have saved her from this, no matter how hard I tried. This collapse was hers to navigate, not mine to fix. The fallout from that night wasn't contained to just her social life. Her finances were in even worse shape than I'd realized. Mutual friends told me she'd had to move out of the apartment she'd rented after leaving me. She'd been struggling to keep up with rent and the lifestyle she thought she needed to maintain, and when it became too much, she had no choice but to downsize a smaller place. Fewer luxuries, fewer distractions. And yet, even then, it seemed like she was still trying to cling to some version of her new identity. She stopped posting on social media as much, but when she did, the captions took on a defensive tone, almost as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was still fine. "Sometimes life just challenges you to grow," one post read, accompanied by a photo of an empty coffee cup and a journal. But the comments were fewer now, and the likes came mostly from strangers or distant acquaintances. The crowd she'd once relied on had clearly moved on. It was in those quieter moments, when the noise of her curated life faded, that I realized she wasn't thriving, she was surviving. And it struck me how different our paths had become. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving in a way I hadn't anticipated. My career was taking off, my friendships were deepening, and I'd even started to feel excited about the future again. I wasn't flaunting it, but I was living it. The most telling moment came when a mutual friend accidentally let something slip. She told me she regrets leaving, they said. She thought she'd find freedom, but all she found was emptiness. Those words stuck with me not because I wanted her back, but because they confirmed something I'd suspected for a while. She wasn't just mourning the life she'd left behind. She was mourning the realization that the freedom she craved had been an illusion all along. By now, her world was a shadow of what she tried to make it seem. The friends, the parties, the lifestyle, it had all been temporary, a distraction from something deeper. And while she was still trying to pick up the pieces, I was finally moving forward without looking back. I was at work when I got the text. A simple "Can we talk?" popped up on my phone and her name flashing on the screen for the first time in weeks. My initial reaction wasn't anger or excitement, it was curiosity. What could she possibly have to say after all the chaos and self-destruction? What was left to discuss? Still, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. A small part of me wanted to hear her out, if only to see what she thought she could salvage from the mess she had created. We met at a quiet cafe near my office, a place we had gone to a few times during our marriage. She was already seated when I arrived, nervously stirring a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. When she looked up and saw me, her face was a mixture of relief and hesitation, like she wasn't sure if I'd even show up. She looked different, tired, maybe even fragile. The confident, carefree persona she'd been parading around was completely gone. "I'm sorry," she started before I could even sit down. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to say this." I gestured for her to continue, sitting down across from her with a neutral expression. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. She began pouring her heart out, a rambling mixture of apologies and explanations. She admitted that she had underestimated how much she'd relied on me, not just financially but emotionally. "I thought I needed to be on my own to find myself," she said, her voice cracking. "But all I found was how much I threw away." She went on to talk about how hard the past few weeks had been, how the friends she'd leaned on had disappeared, how the lifestyle she'd tried to maintain had drained her completely, and how she'd spent many nights alone wondering where it all went wrong. She admitted that she'd been wrong to think leaving me would fix her unhappiness. "It wasn't you," she said quietly. "It was me." As she spoke, I felt no urge to interrupt. I just listened. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, to revel in her regret, but instead, I felt nothing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I had moved past all that. Her words, while heartfelt, weren't changing anything for me. They were too little, too late. And then came the part I knew was coming. "I want us to try again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to fix what I broke. Please." She reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled back. "I can't," I said simply. She froze, her face falling. "You're sorry now. And I believe you mean it," I continued. "But I've spent the last few months rebuilding my life, and I've realized something. I'm better off without you." The words felt like they should hurt her, but instead they seemed to land with a strange sort of acceptance. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. I had to try." We sat there for a few moments in silence before I stood up to leave. "Take care of yourself," I said, and walked out the door. As I stepped outside, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't satisfying in the way I might have imagined it weeks ago, but it was freeing. I had given her a chance to speak, and I had made my decision. What struck me most as I walked back to my office was how much lighter I felt. The weight of her leaving, the confusion, the anger, it was all gone. I wasn't tied to her anymore, not in anger, not in love, and not in regret. I was free to focus on the life I was building, a life that no longer had room for someone who didn't see my worth when it mattered. And that, I realized, was the best thing I could have hoped for. As I walked away from that cafe, I didn't look back. The weight of that encounter didn't linger. Instead, it left me with a clarity I hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt fully in control of my life. The chapter with her was closed, and there was no bitterness in that realization, just a calm sense of finality. I wasn't angry anymore, and I certainly wasn't sad. I had simply outgrown her, and the life I had built without her was proof of that. That evening, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through since she left. The pain, the confusion, the nights spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. All of it had been necessary. As much as it had hurt, it had forced me to take a hard look at myself, to rebuild not just my routine but my confidence, my sense of self. And in doing so, I discovered something incredible. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever given myself credit for. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed energy. I had an important presentation at work, one I'd been preparing for weeks, and it went better than I could have imagined. My boss pulled me aside afterward, hinting at a potential promotion in the near future. It wasn't just the professional success, though. It was the way I felt while giving that presentation, confident, capable, like I was finally the version of myself I'd always wanted to be. Later that day, I got a text from her, just a simple "thank you for listening." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say, and engaging further would only tether me to a past I'd already left behind. Instead, I turned my attention to something, or rather, someone who had been a bright spot in my life lately. There was a woman I'd been getting to know at work, someone younger and full of energy, with a sharp wit and a kindness that felt refreshing. She wasn't someone I'd expected to cross paths with, let alone consider dating, but our conversations had become the highlight of my days. That evening, we had plans for dinner, and for the first time in years, I felt excited about the possibility of what could come next. As I got ready for our date, I took one last look in the mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the same one who had begged his wife not to walk out the door. He wasn't the man who had spent sleepless nights scrolling through her social media, trying to make sense of her new life. That man was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, more grounded, and most importantly, happier. Dinner that night was effortless. We laughed, talked about everything from work to travel, and for a moment it struck me how different this felt. There were no shadows of the past hanging over me, no comparison to what had come before. This was new, fresh, and entirely on my terms. When I got home, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come in just a few months. The version of me who had sat in that silent, empty apartment after she left would never have believed it. But now, as I looked around at the home I'd made for myself, a space that felt truly mine, full of things that brought me joy, I couldn't help but smile. She had been right about one thing. I realized I was better off alone. But not in the way she had imagined. I wasn't wallowing in loneliness or bitterness. I was thriving, building a life I was proud of, and connecting with people who truly valued me. I didn't regret meeting her, nor did I regret letting her go. In the end, her leaving had been the best thing that ever happened to me, because it gave me the chance to find myself again, and maybe someone even better. Looking back at that night, sitting alone on the couch with a glass of whiskey I didn't even taste, I honestly believed the pain would kill me. It felt like someone had cracked my chest open and left it that way. But tonight, Months later, standing in my own apartment that finally feels like home again, I realized the pain didn't kill me. It burned everything weak away. I'm not going to lie and say I never think about her. Sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, her voice still echoes, "I don't need you anymore." But the sting is gone. It's become just a scar, proof that I survived something I once thought would destroy me. What surprises me most is how grateful I am for that sentence now. Those 5 words were the brutal kindness I needed. They forced me to stop coasting through a marriage where I had slowly become optional, and they shoved me, bleeding and furious, into a life I was too comfortable to build for myself. I used to think love meant staying no matter what, fixing no matter what, forgiving no matter what. I was wrong. Real love, the kind I'm starting to understand now, also means loving yourself enough to walk away when someone shows you, clearly and without remorse, that your presence is negotiable. When she said she didn't need me, she handed me the greatest gift disguised as devastation, permission to finally need myself. These days, I wake up without dread. My mornings belong to me, coffee exactly how I like it, music loud, no eggshell walking around someone else's mood. I run farther than I ever did when I was trying to stay attractive for her. I read books I actually enjoy instead of pretending to care about her self-help podcasts. Work isn't just a distraction anymore. It's where I'm becoming the man I always postponed being because I was busy keeping a marriage afloat single-handedly. And yes, there's someone new. She laughs at my stupid jokes, texts me good morning without being asked, and looks at me like I'm a prize, not a project. The first time she fell asleep on my chest, I waited for the familiar panic, the voice that used to whisper, "Don't get too comfortable, she'll leave too." It never came. That voice is quiet now, finally convinced that I'm not the same man who begged a woman to stay after she'd already checked out. I forgive her. Not for her sake, she doesn't get to live in my head rent-free anymore. I forgive her for mine. Holding on to anger would mean letting her keep controlling my story, and I've taken the pen back. She thought freedom was a life without me. Turns out freedom was a life without the version of me who thought being needed on her terms was the same as being loved. So here I am, stronger, calmer, happier than I ever remember being, even in the good years of that marriage. The apartment is full of light again. My calendar is full of plans I actually want to keep. My heart, once shattered, beats louder and truer than it ever did when it was trying to convince itself it was whole. She wanted to be free of me. Funny thing is, I'm the one who got set free. And I have never, not for one single second since that cafe, wanted to go back. I still catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. Some nights, when the city is quiet and the apartment feels too big, a small, treacherous voice whispers, "This piece can't be real. Something this good always gets taken away." Then I remember who used to make me feel that way. And I laugh, actually laugh out loud in the dark, because the person who taught me to brace for loss no longer has a key to my door, my phone, or my future. Freedom, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic music or a triumphant montage. It's quieter than that. It's the first morning you realize you slept through the night without your jaw clenched. It's opening the fridge and seeing only food you like. It's buying concert tickets for one and feeling excitement instead of embarrassment. It's deleting the shared calendar you kept for 8 years and not feeling a single pang of guilt. People keep asking if I'm over it, as if grief is a cold you shake off in a week. The truth is more complicated. I'm not over the marriage. I'm over the version of myself who thought that marriage was the best I'd ever get. That man is gone, and I don't mourn him the way I once mourned her. He was loyal to a fault, patient to the point of self-betrayal, and so terrified of being alone that he mistook tolerance for love. I buried him the day I walked out of that cafe without looking back. Good riddance. I've stopped checking her social media. Not out of willpower, it simply became irrelevant. The algorithm still tries to serve me her face sometimes, like a bad waiter pushing yesterday's special. When it happens, I feel nothing. Not anger, not nostalgia, just the mild curiosity you feel when you spot an ex-colleague in a grocery store and realize you can't remember their name. She has become background noise in a life that finally learned how to turn the volume up on itself. Work is where I surprise myself most. I used to think I was good enough at my job, competent, but never brilliant. Because brilliance required risk and risk required energy I was pouring into a dying marriage. The moment that energy came home to me, something shifted. Ideas I used to talk myself out of at 2 a.m. because she'll be annoyed if I'm distracted started making it onto slides, into meetings, into promotions. My boss said recently, "I don't know what changed, but keep doing it." I smiled and didn't tell him the change had a woman's name and an exit date. Dating again was its own quiet revelation. I waited longer than people expected. I wasn't afraid of being alone, I was afraid of repeating the pattern, of becoming someone's safety net again. Then I met her, the one who laughs with her whole face, who orders dessert first, who texts me after a long day just to say I thought about you, and smiled the first night she stayed over. I woke up in a panic at 3 a.m., heart racing, waiting for the familiar wave of dread that used to follow any moment of genuine happiness in my marriage. It never came. Instead, she stirred, reached for my hand in her sleep, and pulled it to her chest like it belonged there. I lay awake until dawn, stunned by how safe it felt to be wanted without conditions. I ran into a mutual friend last week. After the obligatory small talk, he lowered his voice and said, "She asks about you. A lot. She says she made the biggest mistake of her life." I nodded, thanked him for telling me, and changed the subject. Because here's the thing they don't warn you about. When you finally become the person you were too scared to be inside a bad marriage, the idea of going backward isn't just unappealing, it's incomprehensible. It would be like voluntarily putting the chains back on after someone handed you the key and you spent a year learning how to fly. I kept one thing from the marriage, the wedding ring. Not out of sentiment. I had it melted down and turned into a simple, brushed steel keychain. Nothing flashy, just a small circle of metal that catches the light sometimes when I reach for my keys. Every time I see it, I remember what it cost to earn this life. Not her leaving, me staying gone. Some mornings I still make 2 coffees out of habit, then laugh when I realize the second mug isn't needed. The laugh doesn't hurt anymore. It's become my quiet way of saying thank you to the universe, to fate, to her even, for being cruel enough to set me free. I am not healed because the pain is gone. I am healed because the pain served its purpose. It burned the dead wood away and left fertile ground. Everything growing here now, my work, my friendships, this new love that feels like breathing after years underwater, all of it is mine. No one can threaten to take it away because no one gave it to me. I built it with the hands that once clutched at someone walking out the door. She wanted to be free of me. Turns out, I'm the one who learned how to fly. And the sky, God, the sky has never felt this wide.